Thank you, Namita. So what we'll have is we'll have 12 minutes from each of the presenters, and then if I do have anything worthwhile to say, I'll say it in 2 or 3 minutes, and then we can, or I can say it at the end, and we can take 15 minutes of observations from everyone who's here. So we won't waste time. We'll start immediately, and I'll leave it to the presenters to introduce themselves and tell us where they're from, and I can start logically from my right. So Asmita, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for hanging out till the end. My name is Asmita Kabra. I work with the Ambedkar University at the School of Human Ecology. And sometime around 7 or 8 months ago, the Delhi government put out an advertisement asking for the for interested organizations to submit proposals for empanelment as a state SIA unit. We were one of our School of Human Ecology was one of the places that did so, along with 2 others. We were duly empaneled. Then there was this call for bids that came out asking, and we applied, and as it happens, we were chosen to do the first ever the social impact assessment in the state of Delhi under the new land acquisition law. As we speak, I think the report has been submitted, the final report has been submitted yesterday and perhaps is likely to be uploaded today. Since everybody here is pretty much familiar with the law, there is a 6-month window from the date of notification of the SIA sort of award of the contract for doing SIA to uploading. That day is today. And so I didn't plan this, but that's just how it turned out to be. So the previous presentation gives me a nice segue into what I'd like to say. As you can see, Delhi happens to be exactly the kind of place that perhaps this law was not written for. It has a whole lot of people that can cycle down to the Supreme Court. And Nangli Razapur, where this particular social impact assessment was carried out, is indeed cycling distance from the Supreme Court of India, and it's not a particularly strenuous cycling distance. The land that was being acquired is, and it's an interesting case because acquisition is being done for a very small patch of land, not amounting to more than 6 acres, and for a project that was already underway. So in some sense, the clauses that ask the SIA unit to comment on the public purpose of the project and is the land required the minimum or not kind of thing are in some sense not really what we focused on. So what we did was to focus essentially on trying to identify how many people are affected by the loss of land, how many people are affected by the loss of livelihoods. And the key issue that we were grappling with was, how does, given that there have been the astonishing number of land acquisition legislations which govern what happens today. So identifying who's losing land and how much and what their shares are, etc., is a pretty complex thing. And not only is the fact that there are so many acquisition laws germane to the matter, but what's also important is that there's a whole lot of tenurial regimes that actually are underlie people's claims over land, and it's in trying to sort of unravel and parse through these that the major challenge of the SIA lies. So just a little bit about the acquisition. So basically, the acquisition is of some farmland right in the Yamuna floodplains, exactly adjacent to the banks of the river. And on the one side, the Barapula road is supposed to come up. On the other side, a metro line is already passing. So the patch that is being so the acquisition of the patch that is being sought is for a little patch of land that the main acquisition for the Barapula flyover happened in 1995 already, 1992-93, and in 1995, a small part of the land that was already acquired was denotified from acquisition on the grounds that is permanently submerged. And so it's a small part of that land that is now the subject of acquisition, and acquisition under the Land Acquisition Act has only come about because it's a heavily litigated decision and the acquisition is for the purpose of the deepening of the river Yamuna. Channelization of the Yamuna is the official purpose for which this is happening, which is in itself a contentious sort of idea, but I'll not go into that. So given that there are exactly 7 minutes more to say something, I think the report is going to be uploaded hopefully today. So you could download that and look at the whole complexity of what exactly one had to do in this space. But what is interesting is that there seems to be an attempt on the part of the government to sort of learn the law as this process sort of goes along. I think for a long time, folks were sort of hoping this will go away on its own, but since it didn't go away on its own, there is now an attempt to kind of engage with the law, and from the level of the Patwari right up to the district collector and the land and buildings department in Delhi, you see that folks have these booklets and they're looking clause by clause, and they're probably just 2 steps ahead of or on the same step of where the acquisition proceeding is. And as we are, for instance, as we were submitting the SIA report, there was an advertisement asking for people to apply to become members of the expert group, which is going to assess this SIA. I think the deadline still been extended further, so this room, please go out there and kind of assess this report. So, so the steps that this sort of government is taking are they're learning on the job, and one of the biggest challenges is to actually sort of at the level of the lower bureaucracy, the sort of slightly horrified realization that things have changed and this needs to be done differently, and there is a lot of puzzlement about that. But I find this very sort of energizing at one level, because there is space for skills and capacity building kind of things that Namita was talking about, and everybody seems to be in a position where they are looking to learn and sort of move forward. There's a whole clutch of new acquisitions that are out now for tendering, and so lots of SIAs coming up. But the major thing that I find that in the identification of landowners, our biggest challenge was to identify the owners on a riverbed stretch of land which was actually held this was not held by private individuals, but the entire land was commonly held by the villagers of Nangli Razapur. So people have something like 1/30 claim of their father, which means that if there are 3 sons, then that again gets subdivided, and the actual status. So all the other sort of patches of land in this village, the records were digitized, but this patch was subject to a lot of dispute, and the court case was going on. And it's only so the land record updation is something that will happen. It's part of our recommendations that if you do not update, then we know we've kind of given the price, the suggested price of the overall patch of land, but what shares are going to go to whom is going to be a headache that the district collector will have to deal with, because they do need to update and do the mutations and all of those things that will then determine individual land share. So the shadow of older land tenure regimes falls quite significantly onto the current situation. So for instance, a part of this 6 acres that's being acquired has the Punjab Land Revenue Act. It falls under that jurisdiction, and the second part falls under the Delhi law. So it's kind of already complicated there. And contestations over ownership, how the Jan Sunwai was held, how much of a stake public representatives have in this at this moment in Delhi's history, the place and time. So in the Jan Sunwai, you find that while the farmers continuously position themselves as being poor people who are still willing to pay this price for the development of Delhi, the fact is that they have successfully managed to stall this acquisition for over 2 decades before the new sort of legislation came, and the private negotiations that the High Court had asked broke down, and only then was acquisition under this new law kind of initiated. And in the Jan Sunwai, there was a lot of very visible kind of opposition, which was said without fear. In that sense, I think the several of the things that are written in the LARR 2013 are things that have the imagination of a different kind of land loser from the kind of land losers that actually make use of that law, as the earlier presentation was saying. So if the ones who are really meant to be protected never even get to court, and the ones that can get to court don't really need this degree of protection, there is something that needs to be thought of about, why there is so much text to the law and how it actually plays out. In the identification of livelihood losses, our biggest challenge was not really in terms of interpreting the law itself, but the fact that the livelihood losers have been in a traditional situation of the exploiter exploited between the landowners and the people who have been their tenants or sharecroppers or landless laborers working under various kinds of very informal regimes. So while there was a lot of vocal sort of presence in the Jansunwai from the landowners, the tenants were either not there or they were completely silent because they had this other bunch of people standing right behind them and they did not speak. But the thing is, this is Delhi. And so because there was a lot of information available to them about where to go, the 2 days before the report finalization is when a lot of written representations came from that segment. So I'd just end by saying that, between the sort of the state acquiring land for the elite, using the power of eminent domain, and people striking back, and the imagination of the farmer and the imagination of the laborer, and the actual doing of an SIA on ground, there are so many more layers of complexity which a single 6-acre sort of case study brought out. I, on the other hand, shudder to think how something like this, something this comprehensive, will happen if you were acquiring a few thousand hectares for a dam submergence. And this still has to be done in a space of 6 months. So those are some of the real challenges, I think, in the way this very progressive idea of an SIA has been thought and how it will translate on the ground. 11 minutes, sorry.
Thank you. That was fantastic, Asmita, and so many questions it raises about, I think one of the first things to happen post this act where something's been done and is being documented and spoken about. I hope we can hear more about it in coming days. Yes, and we shall read it. Kumar?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Kumar Sambhav. I'm a journalist with Scroll.in. I write on issues at the intersection of environment, politics, and business. I'm also a co-founder of an independent research-based data journalism project called Land Conflict Watch, which documents all the ongoing land conflicts across the country, where communities or public parties have been protesting against the change of land use or change of ownership in land across the country. I would like to, and after this fascinating presentation by Namita and her team, which is one of the pioneering studies in dealing with land conflicts in terms of land acquisition and legal cases happening in the Supreme Court. I don't think in the recent times there have been such study at the national level, while we have been seeing that conflicts over land have been increasing across the country over the years. I would like to present some data from our work on Land Conflict Watch, which sort of complements this study, and also would like to focus on a very important point that she raised in her presentation about the Section 24 of the LARR Act and the ongoing controversy in the Supreme Court, what actually it means in the larger political economy if whatever would be the outcome of this case, it would have far-reaching and serious implications on the whole issue of land governance and land acquisition in India. And it plays well in the whole controversy about the dilution of the case that has been, of the law that has been going on for the past 3-4 years. Coming back to the study, as Namita also mentioned, and her findings showed that the cases of conflicts over land acquisition have been increasing over the years, but more importantly, most of these cases are coming from urban areas. So a lot of cases, a lot of conflicts that might be happening actually in rural areas, especially in scheduled areas, and other cases might not be reaching to the Supreme Court. And as we are seeing that all these conflicts are happening there. So one major issue that needs to be dealt with is that there are conflicts happening across the country that may not be reaching to the courts. There are land conflicts happening across the country. There could be extra legal cases where communities may not have resources or not empowered enough to go to the courts. And it's not just the land. India is a land scarce country, and India's ambitious agenda of development and infrastructure growth requires huge chunks of land. At the same time, our population is hugely dependent for livelihood on land. So there are, it's not just the acquisition of private land that causes land conflicts, but there are huge number of cases which involve taking over of forest land or taking over of common lands that also cause land conflicts across the country. And these have far-reaching, in fact, serious implications in scheduled areas, in forested areas where communities don't have legal titles over land. So what we try to do that we try through a network of researchers spread across the country, over 35 researchers. We started documenting these cases which are being documented in any audio, visual, or written form. It could be news reports, it could be Gram Sabha resolution, it could be memorandum sent by the communities to the authorities about any kind of protest or any kind of demand that deals with change of land use or protest against the ownership or change of land use. Then we are trying to document these cases and the relevant data about each case, about how many people are affected, how much land is affected, how much investment is involved in these cases. And so far we have documented about 536 cases, and it shows that over 50 lakh people are affected by such conflicts, and there is about 12 lakh hectare of land involved in these kind of conflicts. At the same time, about 14 lakh hectare of investment is involved in these cases. So this is has serious implications while how these conflicts are taking shape and what are the trends emerging from these cases. Now, coming back to the ongoing controversy of Section 24, what essentially the section means is that if the compensation was not paid for the last 5 years, or the acquisition did not happen or the possession was not taken off, eventually the acquisition would lapse and the land would be returned to the to the landowners, and then the process would begin again afresh in the new law. So in so many cases, as Namita has also pointed out, from the high courts and even in the Supreme Court, when the acquisition in the previous law was lapsed, the land was eventually effectively should be returned to these landowners. But what's happening is after this, if the February 8 judgment is validated by another constitutional bench, then what would happen is that these kind of land would not be returned unless these communities have already filed a case in the court. So as I said, that so many communities might be fighting against these acquisition for projects, they might not be reaching court, and all these communities would not be able to get back this land again. Now, in our study itself, we have several cases where communities fought against the land acquisition. The project could not come up. The government could not take possession of land even after awarding or declaring the land acquisition, and then the project had to be shelved. What happens in that case? The government doesn't want to give away that land. They want to keep it in the land bank. So this is a very important aspect of about holding the land, or say even for attracting investment. There is a parallel process going on apart from acquiring land for the projects. There is a parallel process going on for also creating land banks in the states. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. Land bank had been created since 1990s, post-liberalization, but actual extent of how much land banks the states are creating has only started to now come out in terms of data. So we estimated that in 8 states, almost about 2.68 million hectare land that the states have put out data on their websites. 2.68 million hectare land has been already put together in land banks, and they officially called land banks to attract investors for manufacturing, for infrastructure, and there is a competition between state governments. So now you see these investment summits happening across the states, and then they need to show that how much land they have already readily available for this investment. So that makes easier for even project developers. They don't have to go through the entire process of acquisition. They don't have to go through the risk of later the acquisition being held up or getting into political turmoil. So they also prefer these kind of states. So there is a competition going on, and this 2.68 million hectare is actually equal to the larger than the area of a state of Meghalaya. So these are just 8 states. There are almost 22 states that have created land bank, but the data is not available in the public domain. Now, creating land banks for economic activities totally sounds perfectly okay, because that makes sense. But then you scratch the surface, and there's so many violations emerge in these cases. So one is, when you create land banks, the easily available, you will go for the most easy available land, and that's the common land and the forest land, because there you don't have legal titles. Communities don't have legal titles, but they have been there. So we have in our database so many cases where common lands of villages have been put in the land banks, and then now villages are fighting against that. Now there is coming back to the Section 24. There are several cases where projects have been shelved, and they could not come up because of the protest of communities. Government could not take possession. What would happen? The state governments want to put these lands in the land banks, because then there's a process going on. So they do not want to give it back to the communities. There is a case in Chhattisgarh going on in Luhari Dunga in Bastar district, where there was in 2007 Tata Steel wanted to build up a steel steel plant. The acquisition happened in 2007, but the government could not take possession of the land, and finally the project was shelved. The company withdrew in 2016, but then the communities wanted the land bank. State government put it in. The communities wanted the land back, but government put it back in the land bank. Now the case is going on in the Supreme Court, Chhattisgarh High Court. So all these cases would, this judgment would have far-reaching implication on that. I think I'll just stop here, because that's how more legal what happens in the court would actually decide. And yeah, just to mention that even in the 2015 ordinance that the central government wanted to bring to actually do away with several progressive provisions of the LARR 2013, one thing that they wanted to do is also to do away with the Section 24, because if this also gets through the court, actually would have the same implications. So it basically goes back to the 2015 ordinance. Again, even the new law also gives a freer hand to land banks. So in the new law, LARR Act, if the acquisition happens and possession is not taken for the next 5 years, the government is free to either give it the land back to the communities or keep it in the land bank. There is an equal choice given to the government. Now, in a previous draft of LARR 2013, in 2011, they did not even have an option to give it back to the communities. So that shows that there has been so much resistance to the provision of giving the land bank back to communities, but because of the protest, it was taken up as an option. But again, it's the choice of the government that whether it wants to give it back or put it in the land bank, even in the new law. So that's the context in which this needs to be seen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm very briefly going to speak about something which is so complex and complicated. I don't know, if one can ever, and every time I think we were recently with Mr. Sanan at another meeting, and I just felt that one's schizophrenia really gets heightened when you're talking about this particular issue, especially land acquisition. So, and land acquisition in the context of this kind of a flux that has happened since the old law moved on to the new law. So, the number of changes that have come about, it's not very healthy for what's going on the ground, because as Namita's study shows, and all of us lawyers know that what are the grounds on which this litigation has been taking place. The grounds have been complete lack of following procedure. And it's not as if the earlier law, the 1894 law, did not lack procedure or even fair procedure. There was an insistence on the fair procedure, and that the fairness quotient was, gradually increased ever since the Constitution came into force. So, because of Article 14 and everything, it was, the right to make your objections and sticking to the timelines and getting your notifications out right and all that. And yet there were so many challenges on exactly these. Repetitively, people were going to court challenging on this basis. Now, what I'm really going to talk about is that with a law like this, when you make a law which is not very well drafted, I would say, because it doesn't have clarity, it doesn't have lucidity, the arrangement of sections itself is not very happy, and there are certain sections which are actually drafted wrong, because they're either clashing with some other section, or they're actually impossible to, they just grammatically, and they're not making sense. So in that sense, this law did need some amendments. It does need some rearrangement. So what Namita asked me to talk about was that, what was my experience when I was observing some projects which were supported by the World Bank. On the ground, what is happening? So while on the one hand, you have your full empathy with people who are losing their lands and livelihoods, and like other speakers have been saying, there is going to be some point in which land is required, and it is going to be acquired. More and more states, in fact, are trying to go the negotiation route. But if that doesn't fail, then you do need land, and the land will be taken the acquisition route. So there is a point at which people need to be like you said. Namita said that the people in Delhi are more aware, because they are like cycling distance to the Supreme Court and to any lawyer. They can get a lawyer and they can move the courts. So there's already the High Court is sitting there, the Supreme Court is there, and similarly for Punjab and Haryana, because more for Haryana because it's more urban and you see. But what about the rest of, the rest of the people who are getting affected? So in my experience, while, you can keep doing, and this has been most of my work I've done is in creating legal awareness with different people. And many, many years ago, there was a manual made for people, which was useful, and activists used it on the Land Acquisition Act. But now I'm talking from the other spectrum. And the more you work with within administration and on projects and see the nuts and bolts, the more you realize that you're probably doing more rights-based work in getting it sorted out for the procedural stuff sorted out for the people who are actually going to be implementing that law. And believe me, it's not that people are just nasty and mean and land grabbers, and that's why they're doing things all wrong and just this thing procedure. The first thing is, what surprises you, and it doesn't surprise me really anymore, is that the sheer lack of awareness of the correct procedure. So there is this whole thing has been built up about that agar procedure follow karenge to phir hamare se ye kaam nahi hoga. So I face the same thing in policing and face the same thing in the land, in dealing with land and other administrative processes, कि ये तो practical है नहीं, हो ही नहीं सकता. And the whole thing was built up around this particular law कि इससे तो कभी ज़मीन ले ही नहीं सकते. So there were all sorts of agencies and the senior politicians saying, going to town, saying, this can never happen. सालों साल लग जाएंगे. There was a Mann Ki Baat in which the PM said that 3-4 साल लग जाएंगे ये SIA करने में. And on the other hand, the person who's actually done an SIA feels that 6 months is actually not long enough. I mean, there is a 6 months thing in the act, but there may be places where you may require little longer than 6 months. So this whole thing that was built up around this new law, and the whole thing with the ordinance brought in the more of a confusion, and that whole sense of like whichever state you went to, they said कि अब तो ये कानून हटने वाला है. See, that so low is the whole knowledge and the whole idea of how laws are made and how laws are unmade. So just because somebody is saying कि हम तो इसको बदल देंगे सारे घर के बदल देंगे types, and all, it's not going to necessarily going to happen. But at the lower level, at the lower bureaucracy, they really don't even know that there is such a thing as process, and you can't just do away with laws. But the higher bureaucracy, they do understand. The senior bureaucrats do understand, and so when we started talking to the projects and said that you will have to do it, and it's better that you get your act together sooner. So once one started going through the procedures and started laying it down in terms of, get your rules, make your rules according to the act, don't fall into the same, pitfalls that the earlier law fell into, increase your transparency, do it right. And then they started realizing on the projects that, yes, perhaps that was the best way to go. So the earlier you take out your notification, there's no point in saying that this law doesn't allow us, it takes so long to do it. Because if you're not taking out your notifications on day 1 and still on day 10, you're complaining about the law, where the land acquisition is not going to move. So you have to take out your first notification and then start moving on so that you get your land wherever it's required. And if it's not required, and if you're doing something with a Malif ID, so be it, let it come out. I mean, you can't just say that, no, we will do wrong things, but we don't want to be ticked off for it, or we don't want people to, or the courts to pick it up. So that's not going to happen. So one of the ways to do that was to really bring clarity in the procedure, to sort out this law and pull in, from there's one section lying here, there's one subclause lying there, and they all need to be kind of brought together in a one flow. So we prepared this handbook. I'm sorry that I'm not carrying this handbook today. I should have really, because that's what Namita had asked me to speak about, that handbook. So what we had done for these, the World Bank got it done. It's not for World Bank projects as such, but it's just a process flow, and the whole rule of law component, which is totally missing from the minds of the lower bureaucracy. That there is a certain way and there is a reason why. When you do a procedure, there is a reason behind it. There is a manner and method in which you have to do it. अगर आप ऐसे नहीं करोगे, तो ये गलत है. So that गलत और सही का जो पूरा concept है, that seems to be, I don't know, Mr. Sanan, if you agree with me, but the galat sahi in terms of, doing what is right and just, it seems to be totally missing, because they just seem to be firefighting and grappling with the things and just trying to get that paper through. कि इसको करना है, अब हमने सही तरीके से किया है, गलत तरीके से किया है, doesn't matter, ये भर करके आगे बढ़ाना है. So in that handbook, we've tried to point out the common mistakes that people are likely to make. To those who wish to, they can avoid them and do things in a much better way, and with a clarity that what is step 1, what is step 2. If you don't do step 1, then what are the consequences? Suppose you forgot to do step 1, you're losing time, then what are you supposed to do? You must quickly re-notify and extend the time. You must ask for. So the experience in Rajasthan and Gujarat was that once you sort it out for them, then they realize that, okay, if we don't do this, then the chances are that it's going to fall through the cracks, and it won't happen. So we have made Excel sheets for them in which there will be a pop-up that if you're running out of time, then you need to do this process. So the idea is that once they start following process, the impact on communities and people who are losing their land and livelihood and all that will actually be better. Because once the accountability is being pinned down to do a particular thing according to the process, then the impact is likely to be much better on common people who cannot rush to the High Court or the Supreme Court. So this is basically, I'm just inviting all of you to have a look at that, and also to kind of, help and assist wherever you're involved in projects or with people. So the same thing, the same handbook could be read by a person who's actually working with people who are about to lose their land, and then just help them to do the process and not miss out on the chances, for example, filing of objections, participating in the social impact assessment, having the say in there, and then seeing to it that they go for the hearings when the collector is making the award, stick their toe in the door, put their claim for rehabilitation, put their claim in for the apportionment of the compensation, like you were saying that there are so many people who are entitled to any compensation that's awarded. So the people must go there and say that please make the apportionment in a way that I get my share. So like I'm 1/26 in some particular plot, but I must get that 1/26 compensation should be given to me, and my name should be there as one of the. Otherwise, then that whole right gets lost somewhere. So that's what we've tried to do, sort of try to clear it up, and hopefully then when the amendments are made, a document like that could come in useful, because then you could rearrange or you could make the required amendments as and when. Thank you.